What's up, Wizards? It's Dev, and welcome to, I guess, part 2 of the day 2 of Ikoria spoilers video. Yeah, we'll call it that. That's not a mouthful or anything. Now, in the first video, we looked at the rares and mythics from today. So we're going to see them on screen in this video, but I'm going to kind of ignore them. It's because I've already talked about them. I'll link that video in the description if you're interested. But we're going to talk about the commons and uncommons in this video, and there's a lot more of them than there were rare and mythics. But that said, I don't have quite as much to say about some of these, but some of the uncommons are pretty freaking nasty, so get ready, because sorry about my screen there, but just because we've already done the rares and the mythics doesn't mean that there's not like insane cards to talk about. So let's start with what we see on screen here. Blood Curdle, Shredded Sails, and Back for More. Blood Curdle is just 4 mana for an instant. Destroy a creature and put a menace counter on a creature you control. That's an insane piece of limited, common level removal that also helps, just by chance, happens to make the creature that you're putting the menace counter a little bit harder to block, because you've destroyed one of their creatures. So I actually think this is a really sweet piece that, especially at common, is really playable. But Shredded Sails is more of a sideboard card. This is 2 mana, 1 and a red for an instant. It's modal. Choose 1. Destroy target artifact. Or Shredded Sails deals 4 damage to target creature with flying. And it has a third mode, which is cycling 2. So we already have Reckless Airstrike, which I've pulled up right here in Gatherer, and it's very similar, but it costs a mana cheaper, which might make the difference in red sideboards, although this really doesn't see much play in red sideboards right now. Occasionally you'll see it, but not as much as you'd think. Now, Shredded Sails costs a whole mana more, but it can cycle. That said, I don't think that that's worth it, because you're going to be playing it in your sideboard and bringing it in to specifically do one of these two things. So in that case, I don't think that cycling is really worth that much, and you'd probably rather play Reckless Airstrike, which you're probably not already doing anyway. So let's move on to Back for More, which is 6 mana, 4, a green and a black for an instant. Return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. When you do, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Well, I've also got Bond of Revival pulled up over here on Scryfall, which I think is just a better card for reanimation purposes. Also, Blood for Bones, in case you don't know what that card is. Pull it up. I get a lot of people watching these spoiler videos that don't actually play much standard Magic, so they might not know what these cards are. But also, Blood for Bones is the cheapest piece of reanimation in standard right now. But Bond of Revival is maybe the actual best if you're willing to spend the extra mana. In this case, I don't think this is a standard piece of reanimation, but in limited, it might be worth playing 1 copy of, especially considering its removal, and that's very good. But in standard, there are going to be a lot of decks you're playing against where you don't even really need the removal mode on this, where you're paying like 2 extra or 1 extra mana for nothing. So let's move on to Auspicious Starix. This is 5 mana, 4 and a green for a 6/6 Elk Beast with Mutate 6. And whenever this creature mutates, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile X permanent cards, where X is the number of times this creature is mutated. Put those permanent cards onto the battlefield. This card is uncommon. Isn't that crazy? Another weird, like, polymorph kind of effect. But this time on an uncommon, and if you can mutate it just once, you get an extra permanent. But mutate it twice. That's when you get real value. You get 2 permanents. Now, they might just be lands. That's entirely possible. Or they might be huge freaking creatures or planeswalkers or something. So if you can actually work it out, scry, for instance, to where you have a big creature or just big permanent on top, and then mutate this, well then bam, you get a free amazing thing, and it's probably not actually that hard to arrange. That said, I don't really think this card is that standard playable, and the tricks that you can do with it are probably somewhat limited in limited. That's the name of the format and everything. But at the same time, I think this is probably worth enough value on a lot of boards that it's probably going to be really, really played in limited, where at least the rate is very, very good. A 5 mana 6/6 you could do a lot worse than. But I'll move on. The General's Enforcer. I like this guy. This is 2 mana, a white and a black, Orzhov colors, for a 2/3 human soldier. Legendary humans you control have Indestructible. And you can pay 2, a black and a white, to exile target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. So this is all pretty decent, honestly. A 2 mana 2/3 is at least okay stats. Not the best, but at least okay stats by itself. The legendary humans you control have Indestructible is hilarious, and obviously goes with a couple of different cards in the set. We just saw a rare in the last video. That's a 3 mana legendary human. That gives all your other humans +1/+1. So it curves into that guy pretty well. So at least there's that, but you also get this last ability. It's an amazing mana sink. So I really like this guy, and I think that it might be like the 2-drop and at least a fun budget deck. But if we are building a humans deck in standard and it really takes off, again, this will be the premier 2-drop. So let's move on to Archipelago right here. This is 7 mana, 5 and 2 blue for a 7/7 Leviathan with mutate 6, 5 and a blue. Whenever this creature mutates, tap up to X target creatures, where X is the number of times this creature is mutated. Those creatures don't untap during their controller's next untap step. So you're probably, hopefully, mutating onto a flyer or a lifelinker or something, and suddenly you've got a 7/7 flyer or lifelink guy, or trample. That'd be really, really neat. The ability to freeze down one creature for a turn might actually be pretty sweet in the limited environment, where it might mean that you're tapping down their biggest creature and more likely to get through with your 7/7. So there's some really cool stuff. Or maybe you tap down a small creature and make them block with a bigger creature when you do swing. So again, the limited environment, there's some really cool applications for this, but it obviously doesn't really go too far out of that environment. So I'm going to move up to Scantro Tra Tatani. This is actually, let's translate the card, Clash of Titans. Yeah. This is 5 mana for an instant. Target creature fights another target creature. That's it. That's all. That's it. But it's instant speed and it's in red. It's not the color it usually goes in. So, yep, that's that card. I guess it's technically removal. Yeah, it's not amazing. Why is that all it does? Anyway, let's move up to these crystals here. As far as I know, each wedge or shard gets one of these. Yeah, something like that. And they all cycle for 2, and you can tap them to get one of the 3 colors in their wedge or shard. So that's not bad. It's not bad. Again, pretty decent and limited. Might actually see some amount of commander play. It could be possible, especially if you don't have better rocks. But, again, decent little limited piece. And move on, though, to probably my favorite uncommon of the day. I don't know, there are some really crazy uncommons, but this is right up there, baby. This is Call of the Death Dweller. COD is 3 mana, 2 and a black for sorcery. Return up to 2 target creature cards with total converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a Death Touch counter on either of them, then put a Menace counter on either of them. So this is bonkers. This is insane. Self-mill yourself. There's multiple ways of doing that in the format right now. But you could also just have your creatures die, or maybe you're playing aristocrats or something like that, and you get back a Cruel Celebrant and a 1-drop, like a Gutter Bones or a Cauldron Familiar with this. That seems pretty good. Put a Death Touch counter on the Cauldron Familiar, maybe. You can also just get back like a Mayhem Devil in Black-Red Sack and give it Death Touch. Seems pretty sweet to be able to do that. That's nasty. So a lot of interesting applications for this card. Getting back total converted mana cost 3 or less will usually mean a 2-drop and a 1-drop if you want the most value, but just getting back a 3/3 and giving it abilities, that seems amazing too some of the time. So for an uncommon, this seems like maybe one of the better cards of the entire day, rares and mythics included. I actually think that this actually has a fair chance of seeing some standard play. In limited, it's a pretty decent card, but when you're building your deck around it in standard, I could see this doing all kinds of crazy stuff. Now, moving on, we've got Glowstone Recluse here. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 2/3 spider with mutate, and it mutates for 4 mana. It has reach, and whenever it mutates, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So, not too bad at all. The moment that you mutate it, you're actually getting 4/5 worth of stats and reach. So, hey, pretty decent. And honestly, a 3 mana 2/3 reach is at least okay. And then when you start mutating, it gets even bigger. So, a pretty decent little 3-drop for the limited environment right there. But let's move on to Tenare al Securo, which is, card I would see. Apparently it means keep safe. This is 2 mana, 1 and a blue for an instant. Counter target spell that targets a permanent you control. Draw a card. A lot of people have been saying, oh my god, Veil of Summer. It's not. It's not Veil of Summer. Veil of Summer was in green, a color that doesn't usually get access to cool effects like this. Veil of Summer also cost just 1 mana, and the difference between 1 and 2 mana is absolutely enormous. It is a magnanimous difference. there is a crevasse of difference between 1 and 2 mana for this exact purpose. So I'm not sure that this is amazing or anything, although I think it could still see some amount of play in exactly the right kind of tempo deck that's trying to protect its creatures. But to be honest, or its planeswalkers for that matter, or enchantments, whatever. It just counters a thing that charges the permanent. So, it does have a pretty good little spread of things it can keep safe, but at the same time, it's going to have to be worth spots in your deck, and you're going to have to be playing against removal and all that. It's not as good as Veil of Summer. It's nowhere near as good as Veil of Summer. It's like a fixed Veil of Summer in the correct color, but I'm still not sure that that's going to be good enough. It also doesn't counter spells like Veil of Summer kind of did. So yeah, again, it's nowhere even close. You can't even compare the two cards, but it could still have the just the right amount of playability to see some play in a deck or two here and there, depending on what list we're talking about and what they want to keep safe. But I'm going to go ahead and move on. Why does my computer do that? Go back to where I was. Here's Lean Indestructible right here. And it's got a big old raccoon man and a lady with a missing arm. So that's really sad. I'm assuming that the raccoon is the one that ripped her arm off. Is that what happened here? Anyway, Indestructible Link is 5 mana, 4 and a black for a sorcery. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a lifelink counter on it. This is another reason to have Bond of Revival here, because Bond of Revival is just probably better. Unless you're specifically returning a creature that already has haste, Bond of Revival is much likely better than this, but at the same time, if the creature returning already does have haste, this is just better. But that time's going to be few and far between. So I think if you're going to be reanimating stuff in Standard, it's either Bond or Blood for Bones. And Indestructible Link is probably not really on my radar, but you know, maybe a one of Unlimited could work. I could see that happening. But the art is probably the best thing about the card. But up next, we got another thing that needs translating. Let's do that. It's a white card, Tiger's Will. That's a cool name. 2 mana, 1 and a white for an instant. Target creature gains +2/+2 till end of turn. If it's blocking, instead put 2+1/+1 counters on it. It has cycling too. Pretty sweet little combat trick right here for white decks in Limited, I imagine. I'm not sure that this really goes outside of Limited, although it does cycle, so maybe, but there's just a myriad of combat tricks you could probably be using to greater effect in like Feather decks, and 10th District Legionnaire decks and whatnot. I'm just, the heroic light decks in the format. I'm just not sure that this is exactly where you want to be, but in Limited, I really like this as a combat trick, especially if you can put the 2+1/+1 counters on a creature, it survives to stay bigger and kill the thing it's blocking. Yeah, that's a blowout right there. So this could actually be really good in that environment. But I'm going to go ahead and move on here to Trumpeting Gnar, which has awesome art. I really like the style on this. Kind of reminds me of Lorwyn in a way, but this is 3 mana, 1 a green and a blue for a 3/3 beast with mutate. It mutates for 5 mana, 3 and 2 Simic colors. Whenever this creature mutates, create a 3/3 green beast creature token. So lots of value to be had again in Limited right here. I don't think that this really does much outside of Limited, but a 3 mana 3/3 is at least decent stats in and of itself. And if you ever get another creature out of it, which you very likely will, then it's amazing. So it's fantastic. And even if you have to pay 5 mana to mutate it, you're still effectively getting 6 mana or 6 power in stats right then and there. So kind of a couple of different modes to casting this card, it seems pretty decent to me. But up next is Reconnaissance Mission. This is 4 mana, 2 and 2 blue for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. It also cycles for 2 mana. So how bad can it really be? Because it cycles. Pretty bad. I think this might actually be okay again in Limited, because if you can get some flyers through or some creatures that can't be blocked through, there's a couple of combos that I'll talk about in this video actually with this card. But if you can guarantee to get the creatures through for combat damage, then it's a very, very good card. That could break stalemates, but if you're stalemated, you're probably not getting creatures through for combat damage. So I'm not sure, but it could break some stalemates. Although, at the same time, it could just be a do-nothing enchantment on turn 4 when you could be doing something much, much better with your 4 mana, even in the Limited environment. If you're behind, this does nothing. If you have nothing on the board, this does nothing. If you get Wrath, this does nothing. So I'm not really sure. I'm trying to kind of temper my expectations, but this could run away with the game under the right circumstances. I'm just not sure that it's actually going to be worth it a lot of the time, especially in Standard, where you could maybe build like a mono blue aggro or tempo, more likely, deck around this card. I'm just not sure those decks are going to be into playing a 4 mana do nothing enchantment if they play anything in the 4-drop slot at all to begin with. So I'm just not too sure about it. I want it to be a good card, and it might be playable in Commander, but still, that's kind of doubtful. Up next is Savai Sabertooth. Really, really beautiful art on this, but it's just a 2 mana 3/1 cat. There's been a lot of those, but man, the art's gorgeous. It looks like He-Man's cat. He-Man's cat was like orange and green, so it looks an awful lot like He-Man's cat. But anyway, let's move on to Wingfold Tehran here. This is 6 mana, 5 and a blue for a 3/6 dino, and when it enters the battlefield, it gets your choice of a flying counter or a hexproof counter, pretty interesting, actually. 6 mana, 3/6 hexproof in limited at the common level actually could be really, really good because hexproof is an especially desirable ability to mutate with. So keep that in mind. Now, something I didn't point out yesterday, I think, and I haven't pointed out yet, is that let's say you have a creature out and you mutate another creature onto it. Well, while it's on the stack, your opponent kills the creature you're trying to mutate it onto. Well, you still get the creature that you're trying to cast with mutate. It just enters the battlefield. It just comes into play. So keep that in mind. If your opponent shoots a creature out from under something it's trying to mutate out onto, it's not like them killing a creature you're trying to put an aura onto. You know, it doesn't fizzle the thing you're trying to mutate. You just get the creature anyway, right? The creature you're trying to mutate it onto dies, but you get the creature you're trying to mutate anyway. It just enters the battlefield. So do keep that in mind. But all that considered, I still think Hexproof is a really, really good ability to have on a mutate creature, but so is Flying for that matter. 6 mana might be a little bit too much to ask, but at the same time, you mutate one thing onto this, you'd have a pretty nasty Hexproof creature. So it could be very good. But I'll move on here. I've said way too much about the card. Let's move on to Passo Monstruosa, Monstrous Path. This is 5 mana, 4 and a green for a sorcery. Target creature gets +7/+7 until end of turn. That target creature must block if able to this turn. Cycling 2. Now, to the best of my knowledge, this does not say target creature must block it if able this turn. Just pick a creature and that creature has to block. So it doesn't have to block the 7/7. At least how the translation is now, but it's a rough translation at this point. Now, that said, the card's just maybe limited playable, but probably not even that, to be honest with you. I mean, as combat tricks go, you don't usually want your combat tricks to cost 7 mana, but this, I mean, it's not a combat trick, it's a sorcery, so it's not even as good as I want it to be. But +7/+7 can finish a game, but otherwise it sits in your hand, it doesn't do much. And unless the creature has trample, probably just going to be chump blocked anyway. So I don't know about Monstrous Path that much. I'm not a fan. But anyway, I mean, it costs a card to do that, and it's not very good. But Proud Wild Bonder is a very good uncommon. This is 4 mana, 2 and then 2 Gruul hybrid colors for a 4/3 human warrior with trample. Creatures you control with trample you may have this creature assign its combat damage as though it weren't blocked. So you just turn all your trample creatures into thorn elementals and get going, son. This is actually really sweet to me. A 4 mana, 4/3, not the best stats in the world, but at least passable stats. It has trample, so it benefits from its own ability. You know, it just attacks, and even if it gets blocked and dies, it still, you know, can hit your opponent. That's amazing. And if you have a whole board full of trample guys, or even just 2 or 3 trample guys, you can alpha strike. The turn this hits the board, you know, this might actually be a really sweet top deck on like turn 7, 8, 9, is provided that you have, you know, 2, 3 trample guys out. Especially if they're big enough, yeah, this could just win you the game the turn it comes down. So I really, really like this card, and I think it's more playable than it looks at first glance. But, like, actually could be standard playable in a budget deck if nothing else, and I will be doing that. But I think this might even be better than that. But on to Dreamtail Heron. This is 5 mana, 4 and a blue for a 3/4 elemental bird with mutate 3 and a blue. So mutate for 4 mana. It has flying, and whenever it mutates, you draw a card. So that's actually unbelievable. I just want to let you know, if you have a creature out, you get to pay 4 mana for a 3/4 flyer that draws you a card. That is a really, really good card, especially for a common. That's fan-freaking-tastic, everybody. This has my, like, prematurely has my choice for one of the best commons in the entire set right now. Because 5 mana for a 3/4 flyer, not the absolute best stats in the world, but passable stats if you don't have another creature out. And then you can just mutate something onto it and still draw cards. So that still provides card advantage throughout the game. That could be good depending on how many mutate things you have. But just if you have another creature out, 4 mana for a 3/4 flyer, draw a card is an unbelievable rate. So I really, really like Heron. I think it's one of the better commons we've seen so far. Up next, I know everything about this card except for the actual translation of the name. It's Wilt. Apparently that means Wilt. It's 1 and a green for an instant. Destroy an artifact or enchantment with cycling 2. So strictly better return to nature. Actually, it's not a strictly better return to nature. I shouldn't have said that. It's strictly better disenchant and a strictly better naturalize. It is not a strictly better return to nature, because return to nature has a mode on it that futzes with graveyards. But this doesn't. But most of the time, I think that cycling will be a better option. And this is even main deck playable, especially in this standard, where we're already seeing, you know, things like Thrashing Brontodon and other Artifact and Enchantment Hate being main deck playable. So if those cards are, I imagine this will be. And if you're not playing against Fires or Embercleave or something, well, you just cycle it. I mean, it's just that this is, I think, a main deck playable card that's actually kind of more impactful in Standard Magic than just about any of the other cards we've seen in this video so far. But I'll move on to Dire Tactics, which is yet another really impactful card. This is a black and a white for an instant. Exile target creature. If you don't control a human, you lose life equal to that creature's toughness. This is an amazing card. Unless the creature has particularly extremely high toughness, starting at like 4 or 5, then the card doesn't seem as good, but especially in the early game, this is great, and there are going to be a lot of control decks that really don't mind taking 5 or 6 damage to kill a big creature with this, because they've got plenty of ways to gain life and otherwise take control of the game. So I think there could be plenty of decks that play a 1 or 2 of this, you know, along with other 1 or 2 ofs like Mortify and Despark and whatnot. And I just think it really could form the core a really interesting removal suite. I don't think you play 4 of this, but I do think it's a very good card in Standard Magic, and even in other formats for that matter, like Commander, where the life hit means even less. I think this is a very playable card. But really, like I said, I don't have much to say about it because it's just a very solid piece of removal. But this is another one of the more impactful cards we'll look at in this entire video. But moving on to Cairn Whisperer. This is 5 mana, 4 and a black for a 4/4 Nightmare. Love it. And it mutates for 4 mana, 3 and a black. It's got Menace, and whenever it mutates, each opponent discards a card. So a 4 mana 4/4 Menace that makes them discard when it ETBs is actually kind of decent. Not standard playable decent, obviously. It's no Nicol Bolas the Ravager, but it's still like really, really decent and limited. So again, I like this at the common level. I wish it flew rather than having Menace, but it's still got an evasive ability. And it looks like they're really like pimping Menace in this set, but still, I kind of like this a good bit, but even in like a standard budget discard deck, I'm not sure that it's great. But it could be like your win condition in some ways. 4/4 is not bad. And it's got Menace, so if you're making them discard a bunch of cards, it's less likely they'll have 2 creatures to block it. So if they do have 2 creatures to block it, it's likely that you 2-for-1 them with it. So yeah, I kind of like it, but again, it probably won't see real standard play at all. It's a very solid limited card, though. Honestly, 5 mana for a 4/4 Menace without even mutating, it's not bad. But I'll move on to Flourishing Fox. I love the art on this. It gives me Persona 4 vibes. But if you play the game, you know what I'm talking about. It's just 1 white for a 1/1 Fox. All yo yens, yip yip yap. Whenever you cycle another card, put a +1/+1 counter on Flourishing Fox, and it cycles for 1. Now, I haven't really gotten to talk about this yet, but we've seen a few cards now. I think it's 3 that cycle for 1 mana, and that is very, very rare. Cycling usually starts at 2 mana. Cycling for 1 is very good. Like, that's really, really good. In the cycling deck, this is obviously unbelievable. If you put enough cards together that cycle for 1, you get a little 3/3 for 1 mana. Well, it's really effectively 3 mana, but you also got to draw the cards. But you know what I'm saying. Play this on turn 1, you can have a 3/3 by turn 2. And an even bigger card in subsequent turns. So this could get really big over the course of the game if you just cycle cards, but then you're not really committing anything else to the board. You're not killing your opponent's stuff either. So there's kind of some push-pull here, but in a deck that's going to be cycling cards anyway, if you can just get this to a 3/3, it's pretty good. Honestly, you get it to a 2/2, it's not bad because you only spent 1 mana on it. I like this card a good bit. I'm not sure how much how much decks are going to actually want to play it, because a white weenie deck that would normally want a card like this probably doesn't play that many cyclers, right? But we'll have to wait and see. I really like the cut of this card's jib, but it's going to heavily rely on what else is in this set. Although we'll say it could go into Modern, where we already have cycling cards from like Amonkhet, and farther back formats where you have cycling cards from like 4 different sets. So Flourishing Fox might actually be really good in older formats, but I'm mostly concerned with how good it is in Standard. If we see more things that cycle for 1 mana, card might actually be really good, but just based on the fact that it cycles for 1 mana in the first place, I'm inclined to call this a good card, just based on that fact. But let's move on to Channeled Force. This is 4 mana. 2. Oh my god, it's 4 mana? Wow, the first time I read this, I thought it was 2, and I thought it was a bad card. My god. 4 mana, 2, a red and a blue for an instant. As an additional cost to cast it, you discard X cards. Target player draws X cards. Channeled Force deals X damage to up to 1 target creature or planeswalker. So my first thought for this was Niv Mizzet Paran. Now, I haven't done this with every card in the video, but I will do it with Niv Mizzet, because I think that this might be one of the better applications for this card. You draw a bunch of cards and you're dealing damage to them. And the only reason you have to do that is because this card doesn't hit players. If it hit players, that would be really very, very sweet. Like if it hit them for damage. that would be very sweet. But you can only hit the creature or the planeswalker for damage. So if you have a Niv Mizzet out, you can effectively convert this into a fireball. And not only myself, but a bunch of different YouTubers have been playing Finale of Revelation, the blue one, to just draw a ton of cards, thanks to things like Nyx Bloom Ancient in this format. So it's not uncommon, like in the Mono Blue Lotus deck, that's another good example. The Mono Blue Lotus deck that plays Gadwick, that one draws, you know, 1,000,000 cards and routinely has 30 cards in its hand at any given time. So, you know, decks like that might actually be able to make really good use out of a card like this if it hit players, but it doesn't. That said, if you have a Niv Mizzet out, it effectively does hit players, and you draw a bunch of cards, and you kill one of their things. So maybe in like meme decks, this will be decent, but I think having to discard a bunch of cards is just not worth it. Yeah, you get to draw a bunch of cards too, but you know, there's been a lot of times where I played a Cavalier of Flame, and I've discarded like 2 lands, or discarded no lands. I mean, and that's a good card. You know, even if you have to discard, you end up discarding your entire hand. It's a very good card. Man, especially if you discard your whole hand. Cavalier Flame's a good card, but my point here is that there's a lot of times where I play Cavalier and my hand is too stacked to want to discard anything, and I think that might be the case with Channel Force. It looks like a good card at first glance, and then you get to thinking about it, and you're like, eh. And that's when I thought it cost 2 mana. At 4 mana, no, I think this is a stinker. I'm pretty sure this is a stinker. But again, in these meme decks where you just draw 1 billion cards, this card might be playable here and there. But let's move on to Devouring Bite. Oh, this is a bad card too. It looks like a good card. It's a bad card. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast the spell, reveal a creature card from your hand. Devouring Bite deals damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to the revealed card's power. Now, again, I think this is fairly bad because imagine top decking this when you have no other cards in your hand, which will happen quite a bit if you play a number of copies of it in your deck. And then it's just bad. It's kind of bad. You have to reveal a card. You can't like pick a creature that you have on the table, right? It's just reveal the creature card from your hand. So if you don't have one, it's terrible. Or if you only have, say, a Paradise Druid, it's pretty terrible for the most part, you know, especially at the 3 mana rate. And at a sorcery, you know, if it was an instant, we could maybe talk about that too. But as it is, I love fight effects. I especially love removal in green, and you'll probably play this in your limited deck because it's effectively removal. If you don't have access to other removal, you'll probably play it. But just beware, there are a lot of like fail cases for this card that you don't necessarily see the first time you read it. So just keep that in mind. I wish I liked Devouring Bite more than I do. But anyway, let's move on to Fertilid. This is a really interesting card to me. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for a 0/0 elemental that enters with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. You can pay 1 and a green and remove a +1/+1 counter on it to have target players search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle their library. So this is cool for a few reasons. For a total of 7 mana, but split up into installments, you can go get 2 lands. And that's actually not terrible. You play it on turn 3 and then turn 4, you go get 2 lands. Meanwhile, you have it on the field to block if that's what you need it for, you know. But you can also proliferate this to where you can get, you know, multiple lands off of it, more than just the 2, if you proliferate it. And that seems like a pretty decent use. I like a creature that comes down, sits on the battlefield, gets any bonuses from being a creature that you can think of, you know, gets any bonuses from dying that you can think of, all that kind of stuff, gets any bonuses from casting a creature. That seems pretty decent. So, you know, it's not too bad. Just for the fact that it's a 2 mana, or it's a 2/2. So, but you know, you can block with it and then remove the 2 counters from it all at the same time. So you can stop some damage, go get some lands. So I actually kind of like a lot about this card. I don't think it's standard playable. I think it's more than limited playable. It fixes your mana. And note that pretty much anything that gets +1/+1 counters is at least decent with the mutate mechanic. So that's something else to think of. But all in all, you know, because if you, let's say you mutate like a 6/6 onto this, well, it's actually an 8/8 because it's got 2 +1/+1 counters. But anyway, you're effectively like adding, you know, usually you don't add up the power and toughness of creatures when you mutate, but in this, +1/+1 counters gives you a way to sort of add power to the creature that you're mutating. But anyway, keep that in mind. But I just like all the little applications of this, and to the point where it reminds me of a card like Burnished Heart. And so it might actually see some super, super sparing standard play, the same way Burnished Heart did. What? That's a card? What do you do? Burnished Heart. Burnished Heart. It's a 3 mana artifact. It's like a 2/2, and you can sacrifice it to go get 2 lands. Anyway, Burnished Heart. I don't know why Scryfall's being weird. In any case, this kind of reminds me of that. I've talked about the card for way too long already, but all I'm saying is keep your eye on Fertilid. I think it does a lot of things. But moving on here, we've got Neutralize. This is a cancel that also cycles. That's all it is. 3 mana, instant, counter target spell, cycle 2. That's very good. That's actually a very good Magic card. To the point where it might actually see play in Standard. I don't think that it's much better than things like Sinister Sabotage or Absorb, but just the ability to cycle your counterspell when you no longer need it is actually great for control decks. That said, control decks do often want to hold up a counterspell, so I'm not sure how often you'll be cycling this, right? But in the case where you don't need a counterspell anymore, this actually seems fantastic. Or maybe you're digging for a specific answer. You don't need the counterspell, but you do need the board wipe. Well, this will get you a little bit closer to it. So I can see some control decks definitely playing this. Turns out you slap cycling on a cancel, and it's suddenly a pretty good Magic card. But let's move on to Boon of the Wish Giver right here. This is 6 mana, 4 and 2 blue for a sorcery that draws you 4 cards. Or you can cycle it for a mana. Yet another thing that cycles for 1 mana, and that's good. And honestly, in a format where we have Teferi Time Raveler allowing you to play sorceries at instant speed, I think this might actually deserve a look. Well, 6 mana to draw 4. Cycle it for 1 sometimes. It's not bad, but I doubt this really sees much Standard play. And if it does see Standard play, I don't know that it's going to actually get cast for its casting cost that often. I think it's mostly going to see play as a 1 mana cycler in decks that want that. But again, 1 mana cyclers, I almost have the inclination to call them good cards, if for no other reason than they cycle for 1 mana. That's a very low amount of mana to draw a card. But anyway, let's move on to Skull Prophet. Oh, I like this thing. This is a green and a black for a 3/1 human druid, and you can tap it for a green or a black mana. Or you can tap it to put the top 2 cards of your library into your graveyard. So kind of reminiscent of a Glowspore Shaman. It's got the exact same stats. And it also ends up putting cards into your graveyard. But Glowspore Shaman guarantees that you do this. You know, it guarantees you put cards in your yard as an ETB trigger. You can flicker it to do that more often, right? This one, not necessarily like that. You know, if your opponent kills it or something, then you'll never have the chance to tap it. You also probably want to tap it when it blocks or tap it at the end of your opponent's turn rather than tap down your 3-power blocker during your turn. So that could be a little bit awkward because you mostly want to put cards in your graveyard during your turn, right? So that could be awkward too. I think that Glowspore is probably the better card, but they could go in decks alongside each other as 2 drops for now. And this could replace Glowspore when Glowspore rotates. And with the way this set and the last couple of sets look, you know, we had Escape in the last set. Cards like Glowspore Shaman are actually at a premium right now. So this could actually be really decent for helping you escape cards out of your yard. But, I mean, there's a million reasons why you want to self-mill. A card like this looks really good. Glowspore Shaman can't tap for mana, and this can, so there's that too. There's been a lot of decks where I played Glowspore Shaman and Paradise Druid. Don't have to necessarily do that anymore. You just play Glowspore Shaman and this guy, and it kind of replaces both cards. So works for me. But Chittering Harvester is up next. This is 6 mana, 5 and a black for a 4/6 with Mutate 5. So what I was saying yesterday where it's like, I think it's going to be rare to be able to mutate creatures for less mana, I was wrong. Turns out mutating creatures for less mana, at least at the common and uncommon level, is actually fairly common and not uncommon. Whenever this creature mutates, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Pretty dope. Pretty dope and limited, right? I mean, 5 mana for a 4/6 that makes them sack. Unless they've gotten really, really wide, that is a fantastic card in limited. But there's a reason it's at the uncommon level. We've seen enough nasty commons already, but this is definitely worth playing. Let me just put it that way. This is great. But I'm going to move on to Phase Dolphin, which is awesome because it's a dolphin. It's actually not. It's a whale. It's an elemental whale, even though dolphins are mammals. But I guess whales are too, now that I think about it. Sorry, I shouldn't have made that mistake. But are dolphins whales? Have dolphins been whales this whole time? I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was really young. And somehow maybe I didn't know that dolphins were actually whales. It makes sense that they would be. Yeah, I bet they are. Huh, I feel stupid now. I feel very dumb. But anyway, let's move on. It's 3 mana, 2 and a blue for a 1/4 elemental whale. And whenever Phase Dolphin attacks, another target attacking creature can't be blocked this turn. So that combos pretty well with this thing down here. Sorry to give you motion sickness. Where to go? Reconnaissance Mission. The 4 mana thing, whenever a creature you control deals combat damage, draw a card. So if your creatures are getting through unblocked with a Phase Dolphin, then you draw cards. So a neat little limited combo right there. But I really don't think this goes farther than that. We've seen creatures like this in limited for the last couple of sets. I think there was like a big 1/5 turtle, Mist River Tortoise or something like that, that did almost exactly this. And it's a very good card in limited, but it doesn't do anything outside of that format. That said, very good card in limited. So keep that in mind. But moving on and really getting to the end here. We've got insatiable hemophage. This is 4 mana, 3 and a black for a 3/3 death touch with mutate 3. So you get a 3/3 death touch for 3 mana if you mutate it onto something. Whenever this creature mutates, each opponent loses X life, you gain X life, where X is the number of times this creature's mutated. So obviously the dream here is to kill your opponent with damage from this thing because you mutated it 5 times in the same game. But even if you only mutated 3 times in the same game, you've done 6 damage with it and gained 6 life. So that's, that's not bad. Mutated twice, you've done a total of 3. You've gained a total of 3. It could be worse, but games where you actually win off of this damage is probably going to be few and far between, but it's still pretty cool as a mutatable creature in Limited. But really seeing a lot from the mutate mechanic, aren't we? A lot of creatures with mutate in this set. But anyway, let's move on to Valiant Rescuer. This is quite good to me. This is 2 mana, 1 and a white for a 3/1 human soldier. Whenever you cycle another card for the first time each turn, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Now this has cycling too as well, so if you already have one on the battlefield, cycle it, get a 1/1. That's not bad. Although you probably want to play the second copy too, so you can get even more 1/1s, because you trigger all of them at the same time. But at the same, I just think this is really, really neat. I don't know how good it is. It's a 2 mana 3/1 in white. We've seen a lot of those. You cannot mutate to it because it's a human, so keep that in mind. But I'm not really that worried about it. What I like here is being able to create up to 2 creatures per turn cycle. Because, you cycle a card on your turn, get a 1/1. Cycle a card on their turn, get a 1/1. And that's actually where the card is best. If your opponent's going to swing in on you, you can cycle something at instant speed during their combat step, get a 1/1, throw their math off. It just seems really, really decent to me. But, compared to things like Worthy Knight, which hasn't seen much play, compared to things like Hero of Precinct 1, which should have seen more play than it has, and it just doesn't seem as good. But in the cycling deck, this is going to be an all-star card that's going to fill the board relatively quick. And, yeah, I like it. I like that a lot. It's good. Also note, by the way, I just haven't pointed this out yet. All these cyclers going to be pretty good combined with the escape mechanic. Keep that in mind. But we'll move on to Migration Path here. This is 4 mana, 3 and a green for sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Put them on the battlefield. Tap, shuffle your library. This thing has cycling too. I guess in the very late game, you'll draw this and not want to play it. Or, I've already said this, maybe you're searching for something else. I don't have the 4 mana to spend this turn to search up 2 lands because I'll just die. But, maybe you have 4 mana, you cycle this for 2 to search for a 2 mana removal spell to stay alive. You probably do that a good bit too, but this looks mostly like a limited playable card, but maybe after Circuitous Route rotates, we'll see some action from this, because 2 lands for 4 mana actually isn't bad. But let's move on to what is so far the final card that we'll look at today. This is Barrier Breach. 3 mana, 2 and a green for an instant. Exile up to 3 target enchantments. Cycling 2. Pretty sweet in a format that just had a bunch of creatures get printed in enchantment form. So, maybe against certain decks this could be really, really sweet. 3 for wanting them for 3 mana at instant speed seems really good, but you got to be playing against exactly the right deck, baby. So I'm not too sure it's going to come in from the board too often. And this is definitely a sideboard card. But let's see if there's anything new. Is there? No, there's nothing. So what are our favorite commons and uncommons on the day, just to cap this video off? I really like Valiant Rescuer right here. I think this is actually a very good card that I want to try out. I think it might be one of the linchpins of the cycling deck, and if that deck is any good, probably has a lot to do with Valiant Rescuer. I like Skull Prophet. I've already talked about good sort of Glowspore Shaman replacement. Neutralized is a pretty disgusting counterspell. We'll see if it sees play. Fertilid, interesting card. Flourishing Fox, again, interesting. Dire Tactics, immediately playable. Dreamtail Heron for limited, maybe one of the best commons in the set. Proud Wildbonder, probably just a budget card, but I really want to play it in a trample deck. Escomorcer or Wilt, again, day 1 playable, especially in the format we find ourselves in. These are just fantastic cards. So, anything else? Anything else that was like really just crazy? Oh, Call of the Death Dweller, yeah, COD. One of my favorite cards of the entire day. Probably a lot of combo potential in that thing, so keep that in mind. General's Enforcer definitely goes in the Orzhov or Abzan Humans deck, and that was pretty much it. But yeah, just wanted to kind of go back over the best cards from this video, because there are definitely some really good commons and uncommons. If you stopped in for this video, if you're still here after all this, I just want to say I really, really appreciate you for that. You didn't have to do that, but here you are. But just let me know what I missed in terms of interactions or anything today, or if I said a card was bad that you really like. A hymn, Channeled Force. I'm pretty sure some people are going to like this card. Again, I think it's probably going to be really good in meme decks, but outside of meme decks, it's probably not going to be really that great. But we'll have to wait and see, won't we? But if I missed anything else that you really like, an interaction or a combo or whatever, just make sure to let us know down there. Like the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe. Hit the bell to make sure I'm actually in your recommended feeds, because YouTube doesn't put me in recommended feeds anymore. So make sure you do that. Subscribe, hit the bell. Check out the Patreon. Support content like this. Make sure I can pay my bills and continue actually doing this. Live the dream. All that. Patrons already have. Thank you very much. You're seriously why I can still do this. Really, you're the only way I make money now. So there's that. And also, if you want to pre-order any of this stuff, hit the link in the description. Order it through there from TCG Player. Help out you do. But I guess I'm pretty much done. So again, just take to the sideboard. Let me know how you felt. I will catch you cats later. A lot of work to be done this week. I'll be with you all week. Trust me. Usually my sanity is almost ready to snap at the end of spoiler season. It's going to be worse this time because they're cramming all of spoiler season into 1 week and we have to do like 70 cards a day. But we'll get there together. You'll see. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.